Okay, great. So since we have a good number of people who've joined us so far, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We'll kick things off with a quick overview of what this series is about. I'll introduce Jim, who's been wonderful in joining us today, and then we'll get into the Q&A. We're really trying to keep it as interactive as possible. So as Jim responds, if you have a follow-up question or just anything really, you'd like to ask at any point, please raise your hand. I'll ask you to unmute yourself and you can go ahead and ask. Of course, if you prefer to drop your question in the chat instead, that's fine too, and we'll aim to pick it up from there. We have an hour together, and I do ask everyone here to keep their video on if possible, so we can see who's present and engage more fully during the Q&A. And of course, when you're not speaking, please be sure to keep your audio on mute. Okay, so for a brief overview of this AOM off-cycle online PDW, over the past couple of decades, actually, we've seen an increasing number of academics step proverbially outside the ivory tower by translating their research and the research of others in the field to practitioners and public audiences. And this is being done via books, blogs, newsletters, podcasts, and more, with the volume of this kind of output seeming to increase every year, as well as just the sheer number of distribution platforms that are available to reach external non-academic audiences. And there are many scholars who've been observing this and become curious about how they might do the same. We obviously all have a full workload at the best of times with research, teaching, service, and a whole lot more. And so it's useful to try to understand what are the rewards and the challenges of not just being a knowledge creator, as we all are, but also a knowledge disseminator, which has traditionally been a smaller part of the scholarly role and often left to others instead. So we've already had a couple of great interviews in this series speaking to those questions. And today we're so fortunate and delighted to have Jim Detert here joining us to share his perspective. Jim is the John L. Colley Professor of Business Administration at UVA's Darden School of Business. He's also an affiliate professor at UVA's Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy. He's conducted award-winning research on employee voice, publishing in some of our field's top academic journals, as well as in leading practitioner outlets such as Harvard Business Review and Sloan Management Review. To boot, he's authored over 50 teaching cases, some of which I've used myself and can attest to being truly excellent. In his teaching, Jim focuses on multiple forms of workplace courage, as well as on experiential leadership development and ethical decision-making. Jim earned his PhD from Harvard Business School and in 2021 published his book, Choosing Courage, which we'll be talking more about today. So with that, welcome, Jim, and thank you so much for joining us.
You bet. It's nice to be here, and I have a huge screen. I can see everybody, so you should jump in at any point. This should be a conversation, not a talk.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I'll be seeding us with a couple of questions here and there that I have, but really just jump in whenever you'd like. Okay, so I'll just kick things off with one of those questions, which is to ask, before you became known to many readers as an author of Choosing Courage, you had already built a major academic career. And I'd love for you to take us back to that time when you decided to write the book and tell us a story of what sparked your desire to reach a broader audience.
Sure. I'll mention two things, and both were a set of recurring experiences as opposed to sort of one magic moment. One was teaching primarily executive MBAs. I have been for the last 20 years, and year after year, I noticed two things. One, whatever topic we'd be talking about, when folks would say, "Oh yeah, that resonates. I read, I know." Never once did they say, "I read your article in a management journal." Every single time they said, Um, yeah, I heard from Simon Sinek, or I heard from Dan Pink, or, pick your translator. And it's not that they were necessarily saying anything that was inaccurate, but I think, as scholars, we would generally say they were saying things that get lost in translation when you're not a scholar yourself and you sort of choose to translate. And so one thing for me that just kind of kept pecking away at me was that happening, and then a set of conversations I would have with fellow colleagues in the field, and the general sentiment I think among we scholars has been, well, if one is utter garbage and 10 is sort of truth, that we're positive is replicable and the gold standard. I don't want to really sort of write for practice unless I'm sure we're at a 9 or higher. And what I sort of started to realize is, well, on the one hand, that's laudable. On the other hand, the result is that what most people in the world think they know about management practice is coming from people writing stuff at a 2 or a 3 or a 4. Um, and so it started to strike me that we are not fully embracing our responsibility I mean, we're in an applied field, right? We're not basic scientists. We're in an applied field. And at some level, uh, if we can't get past the discomfort of talking at, a level of, certainty 6 or 7 or 8, we're going to keep letting the world operate on knowledge of 2, 3, or 4. And I think, it took me a while, and I think it takes a lot of us a while to get comfortable with that basic idea that what we know is still more informed, even if it doesn't pass review or 3 muster, than a lot of what's being written. And the second thing was I was teaching sort of general leadership core class, and at the very end of the course, I would always end with sort of, the kind of classic summary we end with. We've covered XYZ. If we had a lot more time, we still have a lot more tools that I could add to your toolkit. But I started to say, I don't think in the end the size of your toolkit matters. I think what fundamentally matters is whether you have the courage to use the tools you already have in the critical moments.
Hmm.
And uh, people just and then I would, sort of explain what I meant by that and give like a couple of you rah rah examples, and the class would end. And now we all know about recency bias. So when I started to read on the course evals, like, what do you wish you had more of in the course? And like resoundingly it was like, we need more courage. We should have a whole module on courage. We need to learn about that. Um, I basically realized, like, recency effect aside, they were pointing to a need. Like, we know things, but we don't do them at work. And actually, that's what we need to know more about. And so after hearing that for several years, I finally made a decision to say, yeah, I've written some HBR stuff and SMR stuff, but it's time to just write a book. Because when I went and looked, there was just, I mean, this is 12 years or whatever ago now. There was really only research on workplace courage in psychology or some very old historical stuff in humanities. There really wasn't anything that I could have assigned to students. And that it just it this sense of like we have to be willing to translate what we know coupled with the specific experience around courage were really the two things that came together for me.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, what you're saying speaks to the classic knowing doing gap, right? We all know we need to save and sort of walk 10,000 steps a day, but actually doing it is so much harder for most. And so this actually ties into some of the work you do in the classroom, which is related in terms of experiential leadership, right? So people say, like, we know we need to be courageous, but we actually need to do it. So writing a book that translates that to a popular audience is one thing. Uh, that's still sort of more in the knowledge bucket. I'm curious how you've tied, uh, the writing of the book with what you do in the classroom experientially to help people build courage as a behavior. And then,
Yeah.
of course, even outside in your trainings or what else you might do outside of Darden or related.
Yeah, so I've really had an evolution on that, and I'll tell kind of one more story that underpins that. A few years into my time at Cornell, so I came out of Harvard, so I've always sort of been a case method guy. I believe in that sort of learning. but I still sort of had frustrations with the case method in the sense that like ultimately even cases as generally written do not mimic the stress of sort of real world decision making because interpersonal stresses at work generally don't tell you they're coming a week or two ahead of time. They don't come with a set of readings that sort of are obviously supposed to help you solve the problem. Often they're sort of an in the moment kind of issue that uh, you can't pull together your learning team for 3 hours before, you respond to a microaggression or whatever the crisis might be. And so I had this nagging sense that we were not fundamentally, for the most part, as educators, we were not fundamentally helping students truly be ready for the moments that matter. That requires a kind of practice under conditions of stress, and far too often our classrooms do not create that sort of kind of condition. And this came to a head for me when I had an executive guest come to my residential MBA class that I had had a few years prior as an exec MBA student. And he told this story. He sort of stood in the pit and he said, I was there to launch this multi-billion dollar new product line. The sort of success of the company depended on my region of the country doing well. It's this huge thing. I'm only 31 years old. Um, and I get there for the huge you rah rah celebration. We got this event with 350 store managers the day before the rollout. And they're all like, I try to tell some jokes to get rolling, etc. And they're all just staring at me with a blank face. In fact, if anything, they seem sad. So I try another joke, it seems worse. Uh, and he said, now I'm downright terrified. I can't tell what the heck is going on. So he stops right there and he says, what should I have done? And my students, these are second year MBA students at Cornell. They're smart people. They've done tons of cases. They froze. Nobody answered. They sat there quietly for so long that he got kind of frustrated. He kind of banged. He's like, come on, folks, that was a serious question. I'm standing up here dying. What's going on? What should I do?
Mm.
And then the students kind of bumbled some stuff. And um, it turned out that what had happened that he didn't know because he was flying down is the son and three other employees of the beloved like training manager for the whole region had died in a car crash the night before. Um, so like it's a perfect like put students in a crisis situation and sort of then it carries on like, well, now what do you do in the 30 minutes you called a break, etc. Well, that night he and I had dinner and he said, in a friendly way, but a very meaningful way. He said, Jim, what the hell was that today? That was terrible. Your students are really smart. They've done a lot of cases and they were terrible in that moment. Like they failed the test.
Mm.
And that solidified for me that just like you can write for practice and try to help people sort of get better, how we teach has a massive impact on whether students actually develop the skills that will matter in the moment. So I left Cornell and I came to Darden, and one of my sort of core missions, and it's what I did the first 5 years, I built a class called Defining Moments. I interviewed 50 Darden alums and I said, tell me about sort of a defining moment in your career. I wrote all these short teaching cases. And unlike traditional case teaching, I give these out in real time. I show up in class, say, here we go. Read this. What would you and why? And, of course, all you surface is people's like mental maps, implicit, biases, intuitions. And therefore you get all sorts of terrible decision making and bias. And you have a rip roaring fight about what to do. And then on the back end, instead of sort of preloading on the back end, I say, well, why'd we just have that discussion we had? What was it about the way we think or our sort of value systems or whatever? And I give readings post case. And that method started for me to address that sort of failed guest experience because now students had to role play with me. They had to defend what they believe in real time. And from that, I started to change really everything I do, like in consulting and exec ed work, etc. I use some variations of this, like real time, stress people out. And I then took that to the next level. I built an experiential leadership development lab. In this lab, we hire actors from the Washington Improv Theater, and we train them to enact very challenging business relevant simulations. And we hook them up to a BioPack physio tracking device. So in real time to the millisecond, they're having their galvanic skin response, their heart rate, their respiration rate, all tracked. And then we have software that like displays, like your EKG and those other metrics on one side, and the audio visual of the actor kicking you in the head. Uh, and it's like a brilliant device for really helping students like learn, like, why do I freeze? Um, what are my physiological problems in those moments? What's the sort of cognitive distorted thinking stuff in those moments? And then behaviorally, what's the toolkit that I either don't have or can't use when I have when my amygdala hijacks me? And that is the essence of how I teach everything I do now, is essentially trying to use materials to create a high stress moment where we can collectively be safe enough to role play, laugh at each other, uh, and then um, and then sort of really learn. And so, you have this somewhere else on here later, but I might as well just say it now. I think part of what I've learned is it's much, much easier to write a book, write for practice, do external work if it's all truly aligned for you. In other words, the question of how do you have time? I would not have time if I was teaching some set of things on sort of generic core topics, this, that, whatever, and then trying to write about this stuff, and then was being asked to do exec ed or service on this other stuff, or had a different kind of lab or institute. Like for me, there's a huge flywheel in that everything I do at this point is ultimately about how can I help humans develop their capacity to function well under stress. And the more you, I think, can get your activity set, your requirements aligned, the easier it is to.
That's amazing. That's super helpful. It's like basically you've created a flight simulator for, these workplace moments that matter so much. And again, very useful to think about things in terms of these integrated flywheels because we often do feel like we're being pulled in so many different directions. And maybe those are some of the things that we all should think about in our careers advocating for, which is that here's what I'm passionate about, here's what I care about. Therefore, this is what I want to teach. And guess what? It'll make me a great researcher too, and really great outside the classroom as well. So, I think
Yeah. And again,
yeah.
I know we're going to go back to this, Amber. I'll come to you in a second. I also think the reality is, I mean, at some level, at the vast majority of institutions, if you're going to write a book or write for practice or whatever, you have to be willing to live with the fact that some of your colleagues are not going to think that's a great idea.
Mhm.
And in fact, are going to say, what are you wasting your time on that for? And so I mean, I think ultimately post tenure, you have two choices. You can choose zero, one, or two of these. One, you can just spend the rest of your life letting other people tell you what you should do with your remaining months and years.
Mhm.
Uh, Two, you can say, screw you, I don't care, I have tenure. Uh, Three, you can try to create some sort of flywheel in which you can do what feels most important to you, but at the same time,
Mhm.
uh, also sort of satisfies the requirements for, whether it's summer funding or whatever that is often contingent upon. I mean, I think there are very, very few places where you probably get summer funding based on writing a book in a business school. I think that's just a reality.
Interesting.
Amber.
Well, very nice to meet you. I'm a huge fan of your voice research, especially on voice flows and skip level leadership. So I'm excited to meet you today. My question is more about the publishing process. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like finding a publisher and what that process was like?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So yeah, I didn't know very much about it initially either, so I reached out to some folks that publish and asked. And the first step for me, I guess there were really two things. One is the question of do you need an agent or not? Um, I think the answer is no, you don't need it, meaning like, you're not blocked from selling to a publisher without it. But in my experience and the advice I got, it's just a division of expertise. Like agents just know what book proposals should look like. They know how to shop them. They are much more likely than you or me to figure out how to get two competing offers. Uh, so, for what it's worth, I think the answer is like get an agent if you can. Yes, you give them 15% of all royalties in advance forever. In my experience and what I understand of the industry, there's about less than 1% of us that ever make enough money on the book to care about. You know, I don't really care if I got 85 cents or $1 from this book endeavor. So I wouldn't get that worked up about how much you're going to give your agent. You don't pay the agent, you just give them a percent of sales. So I would say yeah, the agent's probably a good idea. And then for me, I had heard the thing about like your agent then tries to shop the book and obviously can get a bigger advance if if you get multiple bids. The truth of the advance, and Amber, I'm sorry if I'm saying any part of this that you already know. You know, I used to think, oh, you get an advance. That means like you get $100,000 and then you get the percentage of sales. Well, actually, the advance literally is means you don't get a nickel of any sales until you've paid back the advance. So for most books nowadays, the advance isn't very big. And the bottom line is like you'll be lucky if your sales sell out, pay out your advance. So per for me, the purpose, and I think a lot of the answer to this question has a lot to do with like who are you writing for and for what reason. I realize that for me, the because I really care about doing work with organizations that are serious about human development. Like I want to do extended leadership development programs with high po groups, for example. I wanted to write a book in part, in terms of like who is my audience. I wanted to write a book in part that would end up on executives' shelves, like decision maker shelves, because that would determine whether I had sort of the calling card to get these extended exec ed development opportunities. So for that reason, I actually told my agent, I want you to actually just take it to Harvard Business Review Press because in the world of business executives, Harvard is the biggest brand. Like we all know Elsevier and Wiley and this and that, but I don't think that has any particular cachet for your average executive. Harvard Business Review Press does. So, or Harvard Business Press. So I just asked him to shop it there. He did. They took it right away. I got probably a lower advance. I got probably a lower advance than I could have gotten if he had shopped it. But in the end, again, it doesn't really matter because I think, I published that book in 2021 and I think I got my first payments beyond the advance payback like a year ago. So it's really about I think more than anything, every other thing we're probably going to talk about is going to come back to the question of like, why are you writing the book? What audience are you trying to reach? Are you trying to actually make money selling books? Are you trying to help it be the reason you get other opportunities? Knowing why you'd write. And I would say that that is frankly massively more important now than it was 5 years ago or 7 years ago or whatever when I was deciding because the publishing industry is getting killed. People are reading less and less and less. AI is now a huge problem and mess in the book industry. So I think the likelihood of any of us getting rich on a book, no matter how good is like it is like hardcore in the do not quit your day job category.
Very, very useful to know. Yeah, and I think that's a trend I think we're all to some extent aware of and observing and really brings it back to your why, right? Speaking of Simon Sinek, right? Like know your why, right? But really, he's not the only one who said that. We all have an understanding, and many of us get into this field because we have a deep sense of purpose and contributing. There's a lot of things we could be doing other than scholarship. So that's helpful. In terms of the writing process, uh, again, even if you have that flywheel and it's super integrated, it is, I imagine, highly time consuming. You also alluded to the fact that, well, your institution might not give you that time off just to write the book, even if they want you to produce it and they support that. So,
Mm.
what did the months and years leading up to the actual publishing of the book, what did that look like in terms of maybe taking some leave at half pay or being granted some leave, or even managing your days and weeks where maybe it was a grind for some amount of time, but you said, I'm going to have to do this and knock it out, and then it'll be behind me. So, yeah, curious what that looked like for you.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer it for me, acknowledging that having read, probably 100 books on writing at this point, there are only a couple things I think are highly, highly consistent about the answer to this question. I mean, the one and only one thing I would say is unambiguous from every book I've ever read on writing is get your ass in the chair and work on it. Like there is no other magic than, and this idea that like, I'm doing this, inspiration hits me. Well, then you're probably gonna write a book in 47 years. Like you have to just say, I'm gonna write the book or whatever it is you want to write. Um, so for me personally, I did not take any leave. I did not. Um, I would say the first thing though, I suppose, is know yourself. Like, I'm anxious. Like, I'm just like innately anxious. So I didn't want to sign a contract. Generally, the longest your contract's going to be after you sign a book deal is 12 months. I didn't want to, I didn't want to actually be under the pressure of having to write most or all of the book after that contract was signed. That would have made me very nervous. Uh, so I had done 100%, 100% of the research. The book, like wireframe, macro structure, whatever you want to call it, was done. I'd written, frankly, close to half the book before I signed the thing, and I delivered it in 6 months, not 12. Because for me, stress management meant I don't want the pressure. Now, others might say I need that pressure, but that just is not me. So I did not take any leave. I did not. I just had enough done before I signed the contract that I knew I could easily get it done. Um, and then I used like, a very simple trick, but it worked extremely well for me. My wife had given me some magazine on writing, and the first article I read was something like write a novel in 9 minutes a day. And then like this article just said something like, if you actually do the math, like if you sat down and just typed away for 9 minutes a day, I don't remember what now these numbers were, but it was something like you would type 127 words, and 127 words times 365 days is a 412 page book. It's actually shocking. Like now, of course, they're leaving out like, yeah, but 98% of it will be garbage that you have to throw away and whatever. But I was really sort of compelled by this basic idea that anybody can do anything for 9 minutes a day. So I made this like Excel, this really small Excel sheet that I had in my journal, and I just put like 15 strings of 15, 365 15s. So it was 1 to 365, and then below every number of the days of the year, there was a little 15. And I just said, I'm going to write 15 minutes a day, every single day this year, and see what happens. And I started. And then for me, two things were true. One, the vast, vast majority of the time, I wrote far longer than 15 minutes a day. I mean, it was an hour, it was two, or it was three. But it was sort of like the exercise thing of like, you feel like garbage, so you don't go exercise. But if you tell yourself like, I'll get on the treadmill for 5 minutes, and if I feel terrible, I can stop. Most of the time, you keep going. The same was true for me. And then I think the second thing is, when I got to like day 152 or whatever, like even if I had the flu or whatever, I was like, I don't know, I could turn that computer on and scratch out one paragraph in 15 minutes. The streak itself became something I didn't want to. And so for me, like, I don't know, maybe it sounds simplistic or whatever, but for me, I had the draft that I was ready to turn over to my editor on like day 256. I don't remember anymore, but like it really worked for me.
Yeah, that's incredible. And then it's highly consistent with everything we know from research on habits. Like sometimes it's not even right 15 minutes a day. Sometimes it's just like turn your computer on and then you can't
Yeah.
help but not do the next thing.
Yeah.
So it's
It,
actually great
it's
to hear in real life in what we know in theory has actually worked for you.
it's the butt
Yeah.
in seat.
Yeah.
I also think the other thing that it really helped me with is like, we've all seen doctoral students who, end up like sitting on a rock stuck for 3 years or whatever. And I think it's because a book or a dissertation is such a massively big thing compared to any other kind of writing we've done before that it can be just paralyzing. And I think, just like the advice to PhD students is just get started on chapter one. Just write those first three paragraphs to set up H1. Like that's the same advice, at least I've always given doctoral students, which is you just do a little bit. And it turns out the same thing is true for a book. Like I think a lot of the reasons we don't write more books is we're just paralyzed at the apparent magnitude of the task.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes the opposite is true as well. Like in my experience, I mean, starting out as a doctoral student, I remember reading these like 30-page, papers and
Yeah.
trying to figure out why it's taking these academics. Like they're telling me this project was 5 years. It took you 5 years to write like 30 pages. And obviously there's all this data collection, everything that goes into it. But I was like, okay, so assuming I have the data, like okay, I ran a couple of studies, I got the data, then, I should be able to knock out 30 pages in what, a month or so. And then you just realize it's so much more complicated than that in terms of putting that piece of work together. So just jumping off of that point, I am curious, sort of stylistically, how similar or different was this book writing project for you than your experience with writing academic articles? And of course, you'd written, other popular articles before and cases, which are a little more similar. But yeah, did you find it to be awkward? I mean, we're so used to, again, putting citations in parentheses and which you still have to do. You have your endnotes and everything. But did you find it easier or did you find it more challenging? And did you have to switch, sort of get into the flow of a different style of writing? For the book and then having to switch back for your research. Just curious how that felt for you, that the stylistic difference.
I mean, it's definitely like
Mm.
it's a learned skill, I guess, or acceptance of pain. I think before I started writing the book, I had written quite a few HBR and SMR kind of things, and you know, it you quickly learn that actually the average reader like out there does not care about our 67 caveats for a single sentence, and they certainly don't care about 42 citations for every sentence. We like you learn, and the editors at those places are just pretty good. They're skilled at essentially saying, "Yeah, that wasn't all needed. I trimmed it to this. How's this?" And I had had the personal experience of like having to have my ego let it go. And I've learned some tips over time, which maybe we use in academic writing too. But I learned it's a lot easier for me to let them cut half of all my stuff if I just copy it into a file called for use elsewhere. And I tell myself the story that I'm going to make LinkedIn posts or Substack posts or whatever. Of course, I basically never do, but it's somehow easier if you tell yourself it's saved for future use rather than trashed by the editor. So I had learned some of that. And then I had also learned when you have to push back. So, like, one of the things that HBR and SMR type editors and book editors will tend to do is they overgeneralize in ways that actually cross your own boundary of like, no, that's no longer true. Um, and so, I had to many times, like I would say, for example, um, so under conditions of stress, comma, women in particular will dot dot dot. Okay, so I'm making like two caveats there, right? But that's important. Like that's the group for whom it holds, or the condition under which it holds. And they would change it to everyone finds that, and I would be, and I would have to go back and say, nope, you cannot say everyone. Like that. That's just objectively not true.
Right.
And I had kind of learned to have those negotiations with editors, and they're actually quite good about it. So I would say on the whole, I find writing for practice very freeing.
Mm.
Because you're not obsessed about do I have four citations for every sentence and are they gonna kick me in the head for this like once you know what the message is that you want to say, it's actually really freeing to just be able to write it. in like reasonable everyday language.
Mhm.
And my experience was like, what is the difficulty after you write for academic audiences for a long time? You just inherently use a style of writing and words that are not targeted at like being accessible or interesting. So I submitted the first, I can't remember how much, but let's say the first like third of my book or whatever. Uh, and the advice I had gotten was, remember, Jim, this is good ideas. Like I got this on the proposal. Like this is good ideas, but their language, not mine. You got to dumb it down about 15 IQ points.
Mm.
So I write in the book and I'm like, I don't know, this feels kind of fluffy to me. So then I turn it in and it comes back and he says, you either forgot that I told you to turn it down 15 IQ points, or you have to turn it down another 15 IQ points because it's still too convoluted, blah blah. So yeah, it's a process. Like
Mm.
you are writing for a fundamentally different audience. And I'm working on my next books now, and I just reread sort of the classic. We probably all read it. Murray Davis's "That's Interesting,"
Mhm.
and uh, what it really helped me with this time is, obviously, right, we know that his generic point is um, it has to take somebody sort of taken for granted assumptions and sort of challenge it and say it's not right, it's not true, and here's why, right? And but not to the extent that it's so ludicrous, right, that they also won't stick with it. The thing that really caught me this time, and I'm saying like literally 2 weeks ago, uh, was him saying you also have to get crystal clear on your audience because the taken for granted assumptions of scholars in your community are utterly different than the taken for granted assumptions of the general
Yeah.
layperson. And so, if you succeed at saying, "Hey, fellow academics, you think this, and I'm going to tell you why," you're going to write at such a level in such a convoluted way, whatever, that your colleagues might like you and respect you, but nobody's going to buy your book.
Mm.
And conversely, you have to accept that if you have a shot of reaching a broader audience, you're probably not going to really challenge the lay theory of experts. Um, they're more likely to already go like, "Yep, that makes sense."
Yeah.
Like, and I'm not going to go into, I won't go into the book, but like in the book I'm working on now, I'm essentially saying humans are massively motivated, have massively motivated cognition. They need to feel good about themselves and their self-interest. And so what do? Their brain has cooked up clever ways to rationalize via moral disengagement strategies, right? You don't want to tell yourself you're stealing it, so you tell yourself you're borrowing it. It's a perfect euphemism to get what you want and still feel okay about yourself. And if you talk about like what I need to make that a compelling, like general audience story about, oh my God, I do that too. Crap, I don't want to be that way. Um, what I have to tell them about, yeah, here's the thing about just being a human. We have motivated attention, motivated cognition. We rationalize. It's largely unconscious. That's a kind of a big wow for people who think of themselves as good people and don't realize they do this all the time. But for any of us sort of OB social psychology people, we know everything I just said. Um, and so you have to decide, like, who am I writing this for? And be
That
okay that
makes,
you're not going to probably satisfy one side or the other.
yeah, no, I think myself, I'm sure others have thought of that as well, which is, I think there's two parts to this. One is just that once you have learned something, often your interest in it goes away because you're like, okay, I know that now. So am I, again, what is your why? Am I going to be motivated to now write, a huge book about something that I already know as it's obvious to me? So really keeping your audience in mind and the people who don't know, I think is really important because all of us are lifelong learners. So the thing that excites us is the thing that's new and novel
Yeah.
to us. So I think that's probably a big part of it. And then also, as you said, speaking of courage, in some sense, there is this courage that you need to be not disliked, but then maybe just, some people might think, meh, all right, to your point. I know this, but then again, they're not your audience. And so having that North Star and that external audience in mind and fulfilling their purpose, I think is huge to get you through that. You also talked a lot about the editing, how much heavy editing there was, dumbing it down. So that was after you submitted. So you had those three, that year, you submitted it in about 6 months.
Yeah.
So let's say they give you a year deadline. Is all that editing after the year deadline, or is it included? I'm just trying to get a sense of how long this process can take.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd have to look back to be really specific. In truth, my editing was not like that comment came like in literally like the first thing I submitted, and then it was not it's not hard to sort of ratchet it down one more. I think the book was 11 or 12 chapters. I think, and the editor would feed them back to me like in, chunks of a couple at a time. And honestly, they usually never took me more than a day to go back through. So it was not, let's put it this way. If you can, uh, if you can withstand the pain of writing single-spaced responses to three reviewers plus the journal editor that is twice as long as the paper itself, 3 rounds, you can handle you can handle general book publisher editing in your sleep. It
Mhm.
is nowhere near. It is nowhere near as painful.
That's comforting to know. Great. I definitely have more questions. I have questions about the marketing of the book, but I want to also pause to see if there's anybody in the audience who's sitting on a question they'd like to ask. Okay. Well, if nothing at the moment, again, and feel free to raise your hand. Um, I did want to ask you again about the marketing process, right? So we talked about writing. What came next? What was the expectation of the publisher? I have heard things like, well, the publisher is more likely to give you a big advance or even just want you to want to take this book on if you already have some sort of distribution built in. Let's say you have an email list or you have some sort of channel where you're marketing the book and doing a lot of that heavy lifting on your own. So I'm wondering if there were any conversations about that, what maybe perhaps you came in with, and what you might be doing now for your future books, and then what you just did after the fact to market the book.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say for me, honestly, it's been the most painful and like disappointing part of the process. And I'll sort of start with something that just happened a while ago and then go back to when I first did it. When I was thinking about sort of the audience for the when I was thinking about the audience for my next book, I talked to one other agent that somebody recommended to me, and they came back and said like, oh, I don't know, like I think blah blah blah. Like I think this doesn't quite catch it. But I got this 2x2 formula, and if you want to throw that one out and write the book that I think might be interesting, I got a 2x2, and I know how to. And honestly, it was a complete turnoff to me. I mean, I thought it was arrogant in the extreme, and I was really turned off. And I was like, I don't want to write any book you want to write. I want to write the book I want to write. And but it frankly angered me enough that I had an RA go to the Amazon and the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list. And I said, I want you to make the list of 100, the top 50 on each list. There'd be some overlap. And I want you to make a set of columns that say, like, who's the author? What fancy position, like, what's their title or position role? How many LinkedIn, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. In other words, I had them construct a sheet. It had some columns on like, was the title sexy or was it new? Like some substantive stuff. But really, honestly, what I was trying to figure out is whether my hypothesis was that the vast majority of books that sell a ton sell because the person was already famous.
Mhm.
And in fact, 90 some of the 100% confirm that. I mean, I used to sort of jokingly say, and there's no offense to him specifically, I used to say like, like you go in the books like Barnes and Noble and you see, like see John Cena writes a book, and I'm like, John Cena could write a book saying like, here's what I've learned about farting, and it would like be a bestseller, And so I think you have to just part of what my takeaway is the publishers think they have a formula, but they don't really have a formula. What they mostly do is publish a lot of books, chuck them out there with minimal marketing, and the ones that sell, they back end shove a lot more marketing at them.
Mhm.
Uh, but they do not actually market very hard or very heavy.
Mhm.
In fact, they want you to do so. Coming back around to what for me has been sort of painful about it is it turned out I realized I actually really like writing a book or articles for practitioner. I actually really like working with people trying to get better. I actually completely hate the idea of marketing myself. Uh, it is the worst thing by far in my view about the whole thing. So, then it begs the question, well, are you not willing not only to try to like write something interesting for practitioners, but are you willing to post on LinkedIn once every day and get on X and blah blah blah. And then after the book comes out, um, are you willing to be on 500 podcasts in the first year and do all this other stuff? And I think what I've learned over time is that the answer for me on that is to a reasonably large extent, no. I don't like doing that at all. I don't, because going back to the point, Incy, about like intellectually interesting, I actually think it's really, really it is it's surprising. You might think, well, I already know this, so why would this be interesting? My answer to that is, you know it, but do you know how to say it in a way that reaches many, many people at a way that is emotionally gripping, instructionally like absorbable for them, etc. Like that itself is really an intellectual puzzle.
Mhm.
But just blathering about yourself day after day after day on podcasts, like, I don't think that's a very interesting intellectual thing. You also will end up learning that there's like I would say parasitic, maybe that's not fair. There is a whole industry. I mean, you will get advised if you write a book. Who cares about your publisher? They're not going to do much of anything. So you should hire a podcast consultant and pay them a ton of money to guarantee they'll get you on some number of podcasts. And then after that, you should hire a digital media specialist who will blah, blah, blah. And then you should hire somebody else to fix up your web. And then you should hire somebody else who will get you on a certain number of TV appearances. I mean, you you could spend $250,000 hiring all these people who essentially want to make money trying to sort of cash your thing in. I just didn't find I didn't hire any of those people. I didn't find that whole idea. And it's a very bizarre industry in that they do not promise you results, they promise you effort.
Mhm.
Like they don't say, I promise you I'll increase your book sales by this, or I promise you I'll get you on these top. They literally just say, like, I promise we'll make this many outreaches for you for 6 months.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
like you pay the check whether anything comes of this. And I actually maybe would say it's a long-winded way of saying like writing the book is great. For me, self-marketing the book is terrible. And I don't really know any solution to that other than you perhaps hire people, but they're expensive.
Mhm. Mhm. I think that's consistent with a lot of people, a lot of scholars actually, and their experience. I mean, it is a full-time job, and then it's not a job that a
Yeah.
lot of us are very comfortable with. And so it does take, that is a leap in and of itself to make. And I think it's like everyone's decision in terms of how much they want to
Yeah.
engage.
I also think Veronis is not something we're very good at. I mean, it turns
Yeah.
out there's expertise there that we don't tend to have.
Amber.
So, what do you think is disappointing specifically? Is it the fact that you didn't get much PR support from the publisher? What specifically, when you say disappointing, that's just something I'd like to hear more about.
Yeah, it's a totally fair question. And I should say, I don't think I have an answer that is particularly helpful now because my book came out early in the pandemic. So, for example, the traditional ways that all the major publishers sell are they go to this one conference in Europe here, there's another big one in the US. Like there are, um, and then like HBR Press, to its credit, uses the HBS alum channel and a bunch of other channels throughout the world. And they really try hard to get you talks at these sort of high profile events. And they certainly try to push your book to distributors at these in-person book conferences. all of that was canceled. All of that was canceled in the months leading up to my book. So, you know, what I say about what they did or didn't do, or what they did or didn't do well, um, it's probably not 100% translatable to now. But the the industry itself, I think, just changed in ways that frankly makes it hard no matter what they do. Book, as we know, because of Amazon, independent booksellers, even the Barnes and Noble level ones, Waterstones in England, they're under massive, massive pressure. So they used to buy, I don't know the number, but let's say they used to buy 25,000 new titles a year. Now they buy 2,500 new titles a year and try like hell to sell those 2,500. So it's harder to get your book in outlets than it used to be. Um, and then they made other changes in the industry. Like in Barnes and Noble used to have like single buyers, which if HBR Press could convince Barnes and Noble at these things to buy your book, it would be in every Barnes and Noble. Um, then they went to this like local specialization. So now basically every Barnes and Noble decides on its own buying. Which means even if you get lucky and get in a few, you're probably not getting in all of them unless it. So that part of it is the industry is just, Amber, it's really fragmented. It's tough. But my book also came out at maybe the worst time to sell a book in the last 100 years.
Virgil.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation quite a bit. And going back a little bit when you were talking about your agent and then the other agent that you didn't get
Yeah.
along with so well, that led to the question of how do you find a good agent? So I'm assuming that you can find an agent, and with most of our backgrounds, we could probably find some agent somewhere. But how do you know they're actually going to do the work or put in not just the effort, but I mean, enough effort to get you to some sort of good publishing deal?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know that I know the answer in a cold call kind of way. I think you ask people publish like when I was first doing it, I know Adam Grant. I just asked Adam, like, do you have a list of some folks? He gave me a couple. I talked to a few of them. I mean, I think I think you just ask people who have used agents, do you like your agent or do you know other agents? That's not to say that you can't just sort of cold call contact an agent, but I don't know how to do it. Even this other one I talked to because somebody else in the field introduced me to this person. Um, I also think what I actually don't know because I have one agent and I'm using him again on this next book. It's an interesting question, sort of what you want from your agent. It's funny, like I read a ton of fiction books too, and a lot of people talk about their agent like they're their best friend, their lifesaver, their I don't get the sense that that's the case in business, nonfiction book publishing. Like, I think the agent sells like helps you up front get the thing into the right proposal form. They know what buyers are looking for, the publishers are looking for. They know how to do that. They work with you back and forth on that a bit. Then they shop it and sell it for you. Well, honestly, after that, like I think the next time you hear from them is like when they say congratulations when they see that your book published, and then like when they send you a monthly, or I guess it's a biannual like sales statement. My agent is not like if I needed somebody to give me hugs and push me along or whatever, like my agent would be not the right person. We have he's highly competent, but I think all agents will make clear they're not your editor, right? They're not like they're there to kind of, oh, and by the way, they're also agents do zero promotion on the back end either.
Hmm.
They have like a very focused role. Help you sell the book and take 15% of your money thereafter. Like that is the role of an agent as far as I can tell.
If you don't mind, another question is you're obviously working on another book,
Yeah.
and earlier you said that maybe print media is declining quite a bit. So what made you decide to do another book instead of trying some other format?
Well, I mean, this is the case where actually I'm going to come right back to you and everybody else. I mean, I think the question becomes, um, what other format? Like I mean, it's a really good question. I've spent 3 years actually, I think, partially demotivated to hurry up with this next one because I don't know if anybody, we all on this call, I'm sure, right, keep reading all this thing like only 11% of people said they read one book, and half the people going to college apparently don't know how to read. And I mean, we're all reading all this stuff, right? So I hear you. And I think for me, therefore, the process, this is how I've resolved the process. What I want to say cannot be said in an article length or less. It is a long thing to share with folks. Like it's a book form project. Uh, and what's taken me some time to get my head around is how can I write the book? This time I'm going to write the book so that, in a sense, like I give it all away in chapter one. Like, because one thing that multiple people now tell me is first, you're lucky if people buy the book. Second, you're even luckier if they read more than chapter one. Like a massive percentage of people read the first chapter of the book. So the advice now people give is give it all away in chapter one. Nonfiction is not a novel. No one wants to read to the end to figure out what you were talking about. So you give it all away apparently in chapter one. And then what I've decided I'm going to do is I am structuring all the rest of the chapters in a way that in my own teaching or consulting or whatever, and in anybody else's. So, for example, I told you generically it's a book on the stories we tell ourselves, rationalizations. One of the chapters is going to be called Deceiving Ourselves in the Digital World. And it's going to be focused explicitly on how, like, you wouldn't walk around somebody's office to like steal your exam or steal something from a store, but we do the same kind of things online all the time. And then we tell ourselves a story about why it's okay. So what I'm trying to do is write this book in a way that I'm confident parts of it will be extremely useful to me and others in different ways, whether or not the book as a whole sells it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That's great. Yeah, that's really helpful. That's exactly actually the question that I had. Thanks, Virgil. So curious because you mentioned book and then at one point I think books. So it sounds like you have a few additional projects ahead of you in the pipeline. You talked about one about moral disengagement, which I imagine is the one coming up next.
Mhm.
Wondering what lies ahead for you with the other books and just anything else that's an offshoot from that in this general space.
Yeah, sure. So the next sort of, and I think it'll come after that book. I mentioned that sort of we have a lab where we put people through these intense simulations, and we just completed sort of the first major sort of proof of concept study where it's a 15-week study. People did a pre-test simulation with actors, trained actors, and a post-test 12 weeks later. Um, and in between there, all 12 had a 90-minute a week curriculum. But the control condition essentially watched these async videos where we taught them all these tools for communication and then had them sort of self-apply in writing. The treatment condition watched the same tool videos, but then had 6 weekly practice sessions again with a different set of trained actors. And the basic hypothesis was that like there's no way to get better except practice. And so we expect that this treatment condition that had a lot more simulation practice will outperform the other. Um, as a result of that, we have about 800 videos of simulation practice against trained actors. And so the next book I'm going to write is going to be called something like Moves That Matter. And it's going to be a really in-depth analysis of, if you want to understand um, what does good look like in the face of an intense sort of interpersonal high stress situation. Um, different chapters like here are the moves that matter that help you succeed and sort of how to learn them. And again, if you think about that, right, that's flywheel for me. That's taking my pedagogy, the way I teach and interact in the world, and saying, okay, let me help you understand sort of what I've learned.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that sounds fascinating. We'll wait for all of these great books to come out, and hopefully, at least the folks in this room will be the ones who read them, and hope perhaps many, many more. Um, we have well, we're on time now, but I do want to maybe take a minute just to ask you, is there anything else that you would like to share with us that perhaps we didn't ask that you think is useful for us in the audience to know?
I guess maybe just to kind of reinforce something that, I said and we talked about in somewhat more indirect ways. And that is, to say, while I fully understand the realities of like having to do what others would like us to do pre-tenure, and in some cases, doing certain things to get certain resources, I just really think we have to remind ourselves that we have a privilege that almost nobody else on earth has. We have this thing called tenure. And if you can't decide to do what it is you want to do because your colleague down the hall won't like it, then I think, that says a lot about us as a profession. Like, you only got one life, and at the end of your life, I think like saying, "Oh, my colleagues down the hall approved of me" is not going to be the most important thing to you. I learned this actually, and this is probably 10 years ago now. 2 weeks in a row, I gave like my first academic talks on courage. The first week, some point in the discussion, somebody says like, "Well, this is really interesting, but then, boy, this is really going to be hard to get it right. Where are you going to publish this?" And I said, which was very much how I felt. I said, "I don't know. I don't care. I'm just trying to learn something. I'll figure that out later." And they said, "That's courageous." And I have to say, I was gobsmacked that like the idea of me saying I'm a tenured person and I'm just studying what's interesting to me warranted the term "that's courageous." But I was too gobsmacked. I didn't say anything, so I let it go. And then, but the following week, I gave the same talk somewhere else, and a friend of mine raised his hand and says, "This is really interesting. Where are you going to publish this? This will be hard to publish in a journal." And I said, "I don't care. I'm just trying to continue to figure this out." And then he said, "That's courageous." This time I was ready. And I said, "Look, we have lifetime tenure. That's like we're one of like, point oh whatever 1% of all people on Earth have the sort of benefit we have of tenure. If we think that pursuing our passion as scholars, which I would say is our job, is courageous, then we have a huge courage problem." And I guess so for me, I would just sort of close by saying like there are tons of real questions to ask yourself. Like, why would I want to write for practice? Why would I want to do other kinds of activities out there in the world? And and the answer may well be that it leans toward not doing that for you, and that's great and fine. I would just say don't let the answer in either direction be because other people want me to do it or not. It's your life. It's not theirs. Do what makes a difference in your mind, in your
Yeah. Thank you so much for reinforcing that. I think, sometimes even the best of us, the most courageous of us struggle with this just because of, the external voices competing with our internal voice. And so to hear that from you is inspiring. And in fact, Jacob in the chat says, "This was wonderfully real. It would be great if Jim gave a keynote talk in Academy, maybe ran a PDW on this theme. There'll be a good audience for it." And I do think, especially with this closeout comment that you have, that is creates room for a whole other conversation that we need to have, at our conferences or in one of these forums. So thank you so much, Jim. This was incredible. Really appreciate it. Thank you to all in the audience who've joined us today. And we hope to hear and see more from you.
You bet. Thank you all for making the time.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Take care, everyone.
Take care, everybody.